Hello everyone, Messy Players here, back at it again. How you doing today? This is going to be a different type of video. This is going to be me discussing some of the points brought up against and maybe for The Last Jedi, some of the biggest problems that seem to be circulating the internet right now. It's obviously a very kind of hot topic. A lot of people are discussing this movie, good and bad. And I just thought I'd give my kind of 2 cents on some of the criticisms to the movie. And I won't necessarily disagree with all of them. I might agree with some of them. So let's just get started. At number 10, I've kind of bringing up this resistance bombers issue. At the start of the movie, you kind of see maybe half a dozen resistant bombers, and they start dropping bombs on a dreadnought. I think it's called a dreadnought. And the visual depiction is the bombs kind of falling in space as if they were being like dropped from like a World War II plane. And people are saying, well, that wouldn't work. There's no gravity in space. I know there's kind of a visual dictionary explanation of it. It's like, I think they said the bombs were magnetized and they're kind of attracted to the biggest ship in the vicinity. That's fair enough. Obviously, it's not explained in the movie. But when I was watching it, I thought, anyway, the bombs are kind of stored in an upright, pressurized container. Now, we see that has gravity because Rose's sister falls to the bottom of it. So if they're stored in a pressurized container with gravity and they drop, when they pass through the kind of force field into space, wouldn't they just carry on anyway? Wouldn't they carry on in that direction with velocity? I mean, if you launch a rocket from Earth, once it leaves the Earth's atmosphere, if you turn the engines off, doesn't it carry on going? Isn't there a movie like Space Cowboys where Tommy Lee Jones like flies to the moon? He just needs to get halfway with velocity and he'll just carry on going. So I didn't have a big issue with that. It can't, I think certain people said, oh, well, how should you survive? And if it's open at the bottom into space, they've shown several times, like in the Revenge of the Sith, and even in this movie when Kylo Ren shoots through the force field protecting the carrier, like the hangar bay, and he shoots Poe's X-wing. We'll just have to assume there's a force field at the bottom. I'm sure it was in the movie. I can't really remember. Okay, so that was number 10. And number 9, Commander Holdo withholding info from Poe. This was one I kind of semi-agreed with when I saw the film. It seemed very unusual for her not to divulge the kind of secret plan. Reflecting on it more and more, this is one I actually started to disagree with. Basically, Commander Holdo, which is the purple-haired woman, I think it's Laura Dern that plays her? She becomes the commander in lieu of Leia, being like thrown into a coma or whatever she was in. And she doesn't tell Poe basically anything. She kind of types him as the brash, impulsive, dangerous type. Now, basically, my first point would be a commander doesn't have to tell anyone lower in the chain of command anything. They don't have to divulge any information that they don't want to. But secondly, the plan was very sensitive. This was a sensitive plan. They're basically sneaking past the First Order, completely unprotected, unshielded, and they're trying to sneak onto a planet. So this plan was very, very sensitive. Now, if you think about the kind of the resistance as a unit, as a military, can Holdo, is it pronounced Holdo? Can Holdo trust everyone in that unit? Does she know for sure that they're on spies, they're on people listening? We've seen in Star Wars before, spies on both sides. Now, why tell more people than what needs to know this plan? What happens when Poe finds out what the plan is? He tells Finn and Rose. And who do Finn and Rose tell? They tell someone they met in fucking prison. All right, they meet someone in jail and tell him this plan. Now, what happens when, this character DJ finds out what that plan is? He uses it to his advantage, and it completely culls the resistance. They get destroyed because somebody found out this plan. So, reflecting on this point, it was the right move not to tell Poe, because Poe found out. They took a massive hit. The resistance went from 300 people to around 30. I wouldn't tell Poe anything from now on, So in reflection, I would say that was actually a point I disagree with. It would have been good for crew morale, but to be honest, Poe didn't need to know. And when he found out, he actually fucked up the kind of resistance. He's responsible for those deaths when you think about it. Okay, moving on. Canto Bight, the casino planet. This one's a subjective one. I didn't really have a big problem with it. I think people say visually, aesthetically, it was closer to the prequels. I didn't find that. It was quirky. It wasn't on screen for too long. I didn't really have much issue with Finn and Rose's, I guess you could call it the B plot or the subplot in general. It wasn't too bad and it wasn't too long. I think people say like, oh, they were on the casino planet for an hour. Well, they weren't really. I mean, they were in the casino maybe 5 minutes on screen, and then they do the thing with the, I want to call them, I don't know what they are. Are they like banthas or something? Those racetracks? That one, I don't know. There was a few too many confusing elements. DJ tries to make a point about capitalism and how both sides are kind of profiting off this planet, and that point there was a little kind of thrown in. I don't really think it was necessary for Finn to kind of sit down and have a discussion about the finer details of the capitalistic kind of galaxy. But overall, Canto Bight, I didn't really have a massive problem with it. Maybe Rose kind of her what would be the right word, her kind of kindred spirit with these animals, that might have been a little bit, I don't know. It is still a kid's film, isn't it? Right. Point number 7, Leia in space. This is going to be another one. I didn't really have a problem with it the first time I saw it. It definitely subverts expectations a bit. You see Leia ripped into space and you think, wow, okay, well, that's it. She's dead. And then she can fly like Superman. I mean, I guess she's using the Force to pull herself towards the ship. And I think people have said, well, we don't really have a kind of established canon for Leia being able to do that. And it's like, well, we know she is Force sensitive. She, she's aware of deaths. She like knows when they happen to people she's close to, and she speaks to Luke when he's hanging underneath Cloud City. So we know she's in tune with the Force. Now the thing is with the Force, if we look at like Empire Strikes Back, when Luke is hanging upside down close to death, he does something he doesn't even know he's capable of doing, or that the Jedi are capable of doing. He pulls the lightsaber into his hand without touching it. Like he has no kind of established, he has no idea that that's possible, but he just does it because it needs to happen. He's desperate. He's near death. Now with Leia in space, why isn't that not the kind of same situation? Leia is close to death. She's in a kind of impossible scenario, and she just manipulates the Force in a way that protects her, helps her survive. I don't have a problem with it. I think visually it was a lovely thing to see happen. They weren't going to give Carrie Fisher a lightsaber at her age, so why can't you do something kind of badass and visually impressive? I thought it was a wonderful scene, to be honest. It looks a little ropey. It definitely took a bit of, whoa, what's going on? But that's what Star Wars is about. It's about seeing weird stuff happening. Right. Point 6, weaponize in hyperspace. This is one I agree with. I thought in the moment it was spectacular. We've never seen a ship kind of rip through another ship during hyperspace. I think briefly in Rogue One you see is Vader's ship called the Executor. I think you see it come out of hyperspace and block one of the rebellion ships from escaping. and it crashes off it. In this film, during the kind of tense, closing of three storylines, we see Holdo's ship go into hyperspace, and it completely wrecks maybe half a dozen of the enemy ships, which are, maybe 10 to 100 times larger. Like Snoke's ship is absolutely massive. And I thought, wow, that's an amazing, impressive visual. And then when I was thinking about it, I was just like, yeah, that's like, this kind of, it delegitimizes a lot of the space battles, because if this is possible, then why are they even bothering with rockets, with lasers, bombs? You could just use an X-Wing and rip apart a Star Destroyer, because consider the size. The ship she was in was, 1/100th of the size of one of their ships, and it completely ruined at least 6 of them. Maybe that was something that should have just been like, look, this looks really cool, but it kind of has, narrative problems. It might hurt the story a bit, because basically we've just made every space battle look completely like redundant. So I actually agree with that point. I think that was maybe that they maybe went a bit overboard with that one. Yoda burning the tree. I think this one kind of has two sub points to it. One is Yoda is kind of maybe shitting on the Jedi Order or the law. I actually disagree with that. I feel like he was making a point to Luke. Luke is become what I guess Yoda was. He's a hermit. He's a recluse. He's being selfish. He's kind of fundamentalist. He's protecting this church and this, these raggedy ass books. And Yoda's basically telling them, get your head out the sand. What are you doing? Being a Jedi was more about order and peace and balance and people. It was about helping people, protecting the good people. And what you're doing here is not benefiting anyone. You're looking after books. You're protecting a church with kind of no patrons to it. What are you do you think this is important? That's not important. Your sister is important. This war is important, Keeping the light in the universe is more important than what you're doing here. And I think that was the moral of the scene. I don't know why people are seeing it as Yoda is just like pissing on everything. He's not. He's pissing on this manufactured religion of the Force, when he's like, the Force is about doing good things, being a good person. And that's the lesson I think he was trying to convey. That is my obviously personal opinion. So the second subpoint to that is Yoda effectively manipulates lightning to burn this tree down. Maybe I can agree with that. I didn't even think about it at the time. I guess it does have kind of far-reaching consequences. Can Ben Kenobi just show up, on the Death Star and electrocute Vader? I didn't even think about it. Maybe that is a kind of issue, but that's not, I honestly, I don't have an opinion on that, but I am aware of it. It didn't bother me at the time. Okay, point number 4. This is kind of a couple of points. Luke tosses the lightsaber after Rey passes it to him, and the map to Luke. Twofold, I guess. Luke tossing the lightsaber, I actually thought that was quite funny. I know some people are kind of debating whether the humor ruined the movie. I didn't think it went overboard at times. There was a couple of visual gags that I just thought were actually quite... I thought they were quite, wholesome and funny. Like the caretakers of the planet always getting, inconvenienced by what Rey was doing. That was funny to me. That's like old school humor. They were cutaway gags. I thought the conversation between Poe and Hux at the beginning was maybe a little too far. That they made Hux quite rubbery and kind of cartoony in this one. The lightsaber toss, I thought it was funny. It subverted kind of 2 years of expectations on how Luke was going to react to Rey's presence on the island with him. And to show a kind of complete indifference to her, nobody expected that. I think people were considering, oh my God, is he going to recognize her? Is she his daughter? You know, is Luke's happy? Is he sad? And it was actually indifference, and he just walks completely past her. I didn't expect it. I liked that moment. I thought it was a cool moment. And it definitely fed into the expectation of Luke throughout the story. So I disagree with that one. I like that moment. The map to Luke, I think I would blame JJ for that. That felt like a kind of... There was a few plot threads in The Force Awakens which were completely throwaway, and one was this 2-part map to Luke. And apparently you needed both parts of it, even though the kind of... Was it the piece BB-8 had? Shouldn't you be able to look at that and just, recognize that part to the galaxy or whatever, those 10 planets? Why did Luke leave a map if he didn't want to be found and wanted to die? I don't know. And you're right, that isn't explained. So that, I guess that is a legitimate point. To be honest, I could care less about that. I couldn't care less about that plot thread, is the correct version of saying that. Point number 3, Snoke's backstory. This seems to be another contentious point. Maybe with good reason. We don't find out anything about who Snoke is, how he rose to power, or basically anything about him until he died. And it didn't bother me. I look back at The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. What do we learn about the Emperor in those films? He's basically the guy keeping Vader on a leash. We don't know why he's kind of disfigured and old looking. We don't find out anything about Vader, really. We know he's Luke's father, but why does he have scars all over his body? Why does he wear a suit? Why can't he breathe properly? What's Boba Fett's story? What was Darth Maul's story? Why does he have the tattoos? There's a lot of characters in this franchise where they don't explain where they come from. And even more specifically, the original trilogy, there are a lot of characters where you don't know what their motivation is or where they come from. In Snoke's kind of... in this film, Snoke is basically there to keep Kylo Ren on a leash, and that's to propagate his storyline of, you're right, I don't want to be Vader. Snoke at the beginning of the film tells him, I wanted a new Vader and you're not Vader. And this is a notion that Kylo Ren kind of accepts, and he smashes his helmet and he's like, you're right. And what was Vader's place in the story? He was kind of the Emperor's bitch. And he's like, I don't want to be, in this feudal society, there's a king and then there's the servants. And Snoke is the king. And he's loading around in a fucking bathrobe and slippers. And I'm sitting here trying to impress him. And all I get is force lightning and kind of slapped around. Why am I doing this? Why am I not sitting in that seat? Why am I not the one in charge? That is the crux of this story. Is Kylo Ren stepping out of Vader's shadow and actually becoming what Vader should have been, which is, in his mind, what he believes Vader's path was, to the real dark side, fully embracing the dark side. So I didn't have a problem with it. I don't need to know. I mean, I can presume Snoke saw an opportunity in the power vacuum. The Emperor and Vader are dead, and there's still all these, armies and equipment. And this film told you that you don't need to be born into a kind of ancestry or a bloodline to be in touch with the Force. And Luke, I think, specifically says that to say the light belongs to the Jedi is vanity. Well, the dark doesn't belong to anyone. He just saw an opportunity. He was ambitious. We don't know why he's disfigured. Maybe they'll answer it in some spin-off, but I don't need to know. I know what his role in the story was. And that was to push Kylo Ren's ascent or descent, as you would see it. So I didn't have a problem with that point. I understand why people might be disappointed, but I hope I've given good reasons why it didn't bother me. Okay, so second point on the list, Ray's parents. I guess this one ties into the last answer. Again, it didn't bother me. I think it would have bothered me more if she was kind of related to like the famous characters. Like people wanted it to be Rey Kenobi. Yeah, I guess Rey Kenobi, Obi-Wan's granddaughter or daughter, and it's just like she could have been Rey Skywalker, Luke's daughter. I didn't need that. I didn't need that from this film. I guess if you really like The Force Awakens, which for the record, I didn't really like that film, you might have seen that as a grand mystery, and that's something maybe unsatisfactorily answered for you. I think that film did set up that she didn't know who her family was or why they abandoned her. And I just found that a really compelling kind of resolution to that storyline, was that her parents weren't important. They didn't even like her. They tossed her away. And that kind of motivated her grand ambitions in the story. That to me is more, powerful and poignant than her being just the daughter of Luke or the granddaughter of Obi-Wan Kenobi or, whatever. That to me is far more powerful. That's far more reassuring, that she inserts herself into this grand scheme despite her parents and her legacy and her ancestry. I didn't have a problem with that. I can understand if people were let down. I'm not going to get into this kind of mean kind of, well, you built it up in your head canon. That's on you if that was your expectations. I'm glad the film kind of didn't go the way I expected. I was expecting a disappointing kind of answer like, oh yeah, she's Luke's daughter. And no, she's the daughter of junk traders who tossed her aside. That's crazy. That was a good answer for me. Okay, and this is kind of the final point on the list. Luke considers killing Ben, and this is really out of character. This was probably the longest one it took for me to process. I've seen the film twice already. We see a flashback. One is kind of, I guess, Luke lying to himself, although it maybe just omits some details. And the second time we see what really happens. Luke considers killing Ben, his nephew, in his sleep after a kind of vision, a deep look into his mind. And people have been raging about this, maybe kind of justifiably. It was one of the things I saw the first time. I was like, oh, well, that makes sense. And then I was thinking, well, is it out of character? Luke is, in this film, a broken man. We see there's two great kind of contrast anchors to Luke's overall storyline. And in New Hope, you see him youthful, energetic, optimistic. He's wearing white. He's in Obi-Wan's hut, house, whatever you want to call it. And he sees the distress call from Princess Leia. And he's like, let's go. Who's she? She's beautiful. Let's take on the universe. Let's save the day. And then in this film, he sees the same message, and he's old and grey. He's seen the world. He's seen the universe. He's broken. He's wearing black. And we see the message again, and he's like, oh, that was a cheap move. I thought that was a beautiful scene, by the way. I thought that was maybe my favorite scene in the film. And obviously I know the scene takes place maybe 15 years before. So people have compared this to when Luke goes to confront Vader in Return of the Jedi with the Emperor. And he goes there unarmed because he suspects that there's a slither of good left in his father that will turn him to the good side, to the light. And you're right about that. He does do that. That's his kind of optimistic plan. But then what happens when he's there? And when he's kind of, when he's pushed into a corner? What does he do? when Vader threatens his sister, you know, something he hadn't accounted for. He grabs his lightsaber and he smashes the fuck out of Vader, and he almost, you know, he cuts his hand off, which he might not have been aware that that wasn't a real hand. And he gets in touch with his anger and his dark side, and he rages against Vader. And, you know, just before he's about to do anything permanent, he calms down. He realizes what he had done. And he turns to the Emperor and he's like, "You've lost. I'm not going to do it." That happens again in this. That is the same moment in this film. He's lived through that. He's evolved. But he's not flawless. He's not this kind of, you know, unwavering beacon of hope. He's a flawed human being. And he said he had suspected it for a while. He obviously doesn't want it to be true. It's his nephew, it's his sister's son. And he's looking into his head and he's seeing this darkness, and he's seeing maybe the beginning of a new Vader, one that might not be able to be stopped, one that doesn't have a kind of a younger Jedi that can go after him. And he gets scared and he considers it for a moment. The same Luke we see in Return of the Jedi, you know, beating the fuck out of Vader, is the same guy that goes briefly and turns the lightsaber on. That's still Luke Skywalker. And he said, "It passed over me like a fleeting shadow and I regretted it immediately." So I don't think that was out of character at all. I actually think that is, you know, down to the DNA, what that character is about. Luke was never this 100% virtuous, flawless hero. He always had that shade of uncertainty, that shade of darkness, and they perfectly characterized that with it in that moment. He's like, "I could stop it now, and there'd be no more kind of, you know, empire. There'd be no more massacres." And he's like, "Yeah, but that's not me," and he turns it off. That's what happened. So I vehemently disagree that is out of character. I hope I've sufficiently explained why, like, my perspective on that moment. I think it was a pretty fair, you know, summary of the character up to that point. But I'm open to disagreements, as long as, you know, keep it respectful and don't just say, "Oh, you're a fucking idiot," or whatever. I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a different type of one for me. I'll probably release a video reviewing the movie as well, so I hope you check that out. This has been Messy Plays. Catch you next time, guys. Goodbye.